The Great Hall of Station Primarch was cold. It was always cold. The builders had designed it that way thousands of years ago. They believed that cold air kept minds sharp and emotions dull. Today, the galaxy needed dull emotions. Today, they would vote on extinction. Ambassador Elena Vasquez pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She was the only human in a room of thousands. Around her, delegates from 47 species filled the curved rows of seats that rose like a dark wave toward the ceiling. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no bodies at all, just floating lights that spoke in musical tones. Elena had spent 15 years learning their names, their customs, their fears. She thought she understood them. Today, she realized she did not understand them at all. The Ascendari High Consul stood at the center platform. He was tall and thin, with silver skin that reflected the chamber lights like a mirror. His voice carried across the hall without effort. "The matter before us is simple," he said. "The Velkari species has been found guilty of releasing the Keth Plague 800 years ago. 3 billion lives were lost across 12 worlds. The evidence is clear. The punishment is clear. We will now vote on the complete extermination of the Velkari people." Elena felt her stomach turn. She looked across the chamber to where the Velkari delegation sat. There were only 12 of them. They were small creatures, barely reaching Elena's shoulder. Their skin was pale gray, and their large dark eyes held a sadness that seemed ancient. They did not speak. They did not protest. They simply sat and waited for the galaxy to decide if they would live or die. The voting began. "The Ascendari vote yes," the High Consul announced. "The Rothani vote yes. The collective of minds votes yes." One by one, the species cast their votes. Yes, yes, yes. The word echoed through the chamber like a drumbeat. Elena watched the Velkari elder close his eyes. A single tear ran down his gray cheek. The evidence against the Velkari was old and thin. 800 years ago, a plague had spread across the galaxy. Millions died. Scientists traced the disease to a research station near the Velkari homeworld. But the Velkari of today had nothing to do with those ancient scientists. Most of them were farmers, teachers, and artists. They had no army. They had no weapons. They had already lost their homeworld to a dying sun 50 years ago. Now they numbered only 10,000, living on old ships and borrowed stations. And the galaxy wanted to kill them all. "The Humanity Coalition," the High Consul called out. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every floating light turned toward Elena. She stood slowly. Her legs felt weak, but her voice did not shake. "Earth votes no." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then whispers erupted across the chamber. Delegates turned to each other in confusion. The High Consul raised his silver hand for quiet. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "perhaps you misunderstand the proceedings. We are voting on a matter of galactic justice. The Velkari are guilty. The punishment has been decided by law." Elena stepped forward to her podium's edge. "I understand perfectly, High Consul. Earth votes no. We will not participate in genocide." The whispers became shouts. Several delegates rose from their seats. The Rothani ambassador, a creature of red scales and sharp teeth, pointed at Elena with a clawed finger. "You are new to this council, human. You do not understand our ways. The Velkari are a threat. They must be removed." "A threat?" Elena turned to face him. "Look at them. They are refugees. They have no ships that can fight. They have no weapons. Their children play in the corridors of broken stations. What threat do you see?" "The threat of what they might become, Warama," the Rothani hissed. "Then you would kill them for crimes they have not committed, for crimes they might never commit." Elena shook her head. "On Earth, we have a word for that. We call it murder." The chamber erupted. Delegates screamed at Elena in a dozen languages. The Ascendari High Consul struck his staff against the floor again and again until order returned. "Your vote is noted," he said coldly, "but it changes nothing. The motion passes, 46 in favor, 1 against. The Velkari extermination will proceed." Elena sat down heavily. Her hands were shaking now. She had failed. She knew she would fail before she even stood up. But she also knew that some things had to be said, even when they changed nothing. Some lines had to be drawn, even when you stood alone. The session ended. Delegates filed out of the chamber, talking quietly among themselves. Many looked at Elena with confusion. A few looked at her with disgust. None looked at her with understanding. She was gathering her papers when a soft voice spoke behind her. "Human." Elena turned. The Valkyrie elder stood before her. Up close, she could see how old he was. His gray skin was lined with countless wrinkles. His dark eyes held centuries of sorrow. "Thank you," he whispered. "No one has ever spoken for us before." Elena felt tears burn in her eyes. "I am sorry, it was not enough." "It was more than we ever received." The elder paused. His hands trembled at his sides. "We have nowhere to go. The council will hunt us across every system. Within a month, my people will be dead." Elena looked at this small, fragile creature. She thought of her own world, blue and green and full of life. She thought of the billions of humans who would be affected by what she was about to say. She thought of the council's anger, the sanctions, the isolation. Then she thought of her grandmother, who had survived a war by hiding in strangers' homes. She thought of her grandfather, who had crossed an ocean in a tiny boat, looking for safety. "There is one place," Elena said quietly. "One place in the galaxy that will take you." The elder looked up at her with hope he had not felt in decades. "Earth," Elena said. "Come to Earth." The first ships appeared on a cold morning in March. People across the world stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. The news had warned them for weeks. The refugees were coming, 10,000 souls from a dying race, seeking shelter on a planet they had never seen. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo stood at the window of the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. She watched the ships descend through the clouds, old vessels held together by patches and prayers. They moved slowly, carefully, like wounded birds afraid to land. Behind her, the Security Council argued. Some members wanted to turn the ships away. Others demanded conditions and limits. A few simply sat in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. "This is madness," the Russian delegate said. "We know nothing about these creatures. They could carry diseases. They could be dangerous." "They are refugees," Okonkwo replied without turning from the window. "They are frightened and alone, and we invited them. Ambassador Vasquez invited them. She had no authority. She had her conscience." Okonkwo finally turned to face the room. "And now the whole world must decide if we share it." The vote was close, but in the end, Earth opened its doors. The first transport landed in a field outside Geneva. Thousands of people had gathered behind security fences. Some held signs of welcome. Others held signs of hate. News drones filled the air like metal insects, recording everything. The transport door opened slowly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a small figure appeared at the top of the ramp. It was a Valkyrie child. She was tiny, no bigger than a human toddler. Her gray skin looked almost blue in the morning light. She clutched a small cloth toy in her hands, some kind of animal that humans did not recognize. Her large dark eyes moved across the crowd, searching for something she could understand. Behind her, more Valkyrie emerged. Mothers carrying babies, old ones leaning on walking sticks, young ones holding hands in long chains, afraid to let go. They wore simple clothes worn thin from years of running. They carried small bags that held everything they owned. The crowd fell silent. Even the protesters lowered their signs. An old woman near the front of the fence began to cry. Her name was Marie, and she was 82 years old. She had been born in a refugee camp after her family fled a war. She had spent her whole life knowing what it meant to have no home. Without thinking, Marie pushed through the crowd. She ducked under the security fence before anyone could stop her. Guards shouted at her, but she did not listen. She walked straight toward the Valkyrie child at the bottom of the ramp. The little girl froze. Her toy fell from her hands. Marie knelt down slowly. She pulled off her own wool scarf, a blue one that her mother had made decades ago, and wrapped it gently around the child's thin shoulders. "It is cold here," Marie said softly. "You must stay warm." The child did not understand the words, but she understood the kindness. Her small gray hand reached out and touched Marie's wrinkled cheek. Every camera in the world captured that moment. Within hours, the image spread across every screen on Earth. An old human woman, a young alien child, a simple scarf, a gentle touch. Something changed that day. In Tokyo, a businessman watched the image on his phone during his morning train ride. He went home that evening and told his wife they should volunteer. In Lagos, a teacher showed her students the video and asked them what they would do. 20 children raised their hands. In Sao Paulo, a priest opened his church as a shelter. In Toronto, a family cleared out their basement. The wave of compassion did not wash away all fear. Protests continued in many cities. Politicians warned of economic collapse. Conspiracy theories spread across the internet. But the wave was stronger than the fear. Within weeks, refugee centers across Europe were overwhelmed. Not by refugees, but by volunteers. There were too many people wanting to help. Donations piled up faster than they could be sorted. Families waited in lines for the chance to host a Valkyrie in their home. The Valkyrie watched all of this with amazement. They had expected cold rejection. They had prepared for hatred. Instead, they found humans fighting over who would get to help them first. Elder Vorthen, the same leader who had spoken to Elena at Station Primark, sat in a warm room in Geneva. A human doctor was checking his health. A human child had brought him a cup of hot chocolate, a drink he had never tasted before. It was sweet and warm and made him feel something he had not felt in many years. "I do not understand," Vorthen said to the doctor. "Your people do not know us. You gain nothing from helping us. The galaxy has turned against you for taking us in. Why do you do this?" The doctor, a young woman named Sarah, paused her examination. She thought about the question for a long moment. "My grandfather came to this country as a refugee," she finally said. "Someone gave him a chance when no one else would. I am here today because of that kindness." She smiled and continued her work. "Maybe one day your grandchildren will help someone else." And the circle continues. Vorthen looked down at his cup of chocolate. His hands trembled. In all his centuries of life, he had seen many things. He had seen wars and plagues and the death of his homeworld. He had seen cruelty beyond imagination. But he had never seen anything like this small blue planet, where creatures who lived barely 100 years acted as though they had forever to give. Outside the window, snow began to fall. Valkyrie children pressed their faces against the glass, watching the white flakes drift down from the gray sky. They had never seen snow before. A human child took a young Valkyrie girl by the hand and led her outside. Together they caught snowflakes on their tongues and laughed. Far above, in the cold halls of Station Primark, the galaxy watched in silence. They did not understand what they were seeing. They could not understand, but they would learn. 1 year had passed since the Valkyrie arrived on Earth. The world had changed in ways no one expected. The settlement in New Zealand had grown from a camp of tents into a real town. The Valkyrie called it New Haven. Humans helped them build homes using a mix of Earth materials and Valkyrie designs. The buildings were low and round, with large windows that let in the soft southern light. Gardens surrounded every home. The Valkyrie loved to grow things. Dr. Kethra walked through the streets of New Haven each morning. She was a physician, one of the best her people had ever produced. Before the Exodus, she had worked in the greatest hospitals of the Valkyrie civilization. Now she worked in a small clinic with white walls and second-hand equipment. She had never been happier. This morning, she was on her way to Christchurch Hospital. The humans had invited her to teach. At first, she did not understand why. Valkyrie medicine was thousands of years more advanced than anything on Earth. What could she possibly learn from humans? But she discovered that learning was not the point. Sharing was the point. Dr. James Chen met her at the hospital entrance. He was a surgeon with kind eyes and steady hands. Over the past year, he had become her closest friend. "Ready for another day?" he asked. "Always," Kethra replied. They walked together through the hospital halls. Patients watched them pass, some with curiosity, some with wonder. A human doctor and an alien doctor, side by side. A year ago, this would have seemed impossible. Now it was simply Tuesday. In the teaching room, a dozen young human doctors waited. Kethra activated a holographic display, technology she had brought from her ship. A three-dimensional image of human cells appeared in the air. "Today, I will teach you about cellular regeneration," she said. "My people developed this technique 3,000 years ago. It can repair damaged tissue in hours instead of weeks. It can heal wounds that would otherwise be fatal." The young doctors leaned forward, their eyes wide. Kethra paused. She looked at their eager faces. So young, so full of hope. These humans lived such short lives. 80 years, maybe 90 if they were lucky. The Velkari could live for 500 years or more. And yet these brief creatures burned with a fire that Kethra's own people had lost long ago. But first, she continued, I want you to teach me something. The doctors looked confused. Yesterday, I watched one of your surgeons operate for 14 hours to save a child's life. The child was a stranger. The surgeon gained nothing from saving her. She simply refused to let the child die. Kithra's voice grew soft. I want you to teach me where that strength comes from. The room fell silent. Then Dr. Chen spoke. We call it hope, he said. We believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and we fight to make it true. Kethra nodded slowly. My people forgot how to hope long ago. We became so focused on surviving that we forgot why survival matters. She looked at the young doctors again. Perhaps this is what we can learn from each other. I can teach you to heal bodies. You can teach us to heal souls. Meanwhile, across the world, other exchanges were happening. In Paris, a Velkari musician performed with a human orchestra. The music they created together made people weep. In Tokyo, Velkari engineers shared their knowledge of clean energy. Within months, Japan announced plans for a new power system that would end their need for fossil fuels. In Chicago, Velkari historians sat with human professors and compared their civilizations. They discovered something remarkable. Both species had nearly destroyed themselves many times. Both species had survived through stubborn determination. They were more alike than anyone had imagined. But not everyone was happy. The Galactic Council had not forgotten Earth's defiance. They imposed harsh sanctions. Trade routes that once brought rare metals and advanced technology to Earth were closed. Scientists lost access to the galactic information networks. Businesses that dealt with alien markets collapsed overnight. The economic pain was real. Unemployment rose. Prices increased. Some people who had welcomed the Velkari now questioned whether the cost was too high. The Ascendari ambassador visited Earth to deliver a message. His name was Kolveth, and his silver face showed no emotion as he spoke. You still have time to correct your mistake, he said to Secretary General Okonkwo. Surrender the Velkari to the Council. The sanctions will be lifted. Earth can rejoin galactic civilization. Okonkwo listened politely. Then she leaned forward. Ambassador, let me tell you a story. 300 years ago, ships came to Africa and took my ancestors in chains. They were sold, beaten, and worked to death. The world told them they were worthless. But they survived, they fought, and their descendants now lead nations. She stood up. Earth will not surrender anyone to execution. Not today, not ever. Kolveth's silver face remained blank. You isolate yourselves from the galaxy for 10,000 refugees. This is not logical. No, Okonkwo agreed. It is not logical, it is human. That evening, the Secretary General received a message. It came from a schoolgirl in Tokyo named Yuki. She was 12 years old. She had written a letter and asked if it could be sent to the Galactic Council. The letter was simple. It read, We would rather be alone and kind than together and cruel. Okonkwo smiled. She ordered the letter broadcast on all galactic frequencies. The galaxy heard it. They did not understand, but they heard it. And in the quiet spaces between stars, some of them began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. 5 years after the vote, death came to the galaxy. They called it the Scourge. It appeared first on a small trading station near the Rothani border. Within days, it spread to 3 planets. Within weeks, it had reached the inner systems. The plague was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. It attacked different species in different ways. For the Rothani, it destroyed their lungs. For the collective of minds, it severed the connections between their shared consciousness. For the Ascendari, it turned their silver blood to poison. No one knew where the scourge came from. Some said it was a weapon. Others said it was a natural disaster. The truth did not matter. What mattered was that millions were dying, and no one could stop it. The great medical centers of the galaxy worked desperately to find a cure. They failed. The scourge mutated too quickly. Every time they developed a treatment, the plague changed and became stronger. On the Ascendari homeworld, High Consul Velmaron watched his people die. Hospitals overflowed. Bodies piled in the streets. Children cried for parents who would never wake up. His own daughter, Shelani, lay in a medical chamber, her silver skin turning gray. The doctors told him she had 3 days to live, maybe less. In his desperation, Velmoran did something he never thought he would do. He sent a message to Earth. The reply came within hours. It was not what he expected. "We are already on our way." The first human hospital ships arrived at the Ascendari homeworld 2 weeks later. They were not military vessels. They carried no weapons. They were simply large white ships with red crosses painted on their hulls, an ancient human symbol that meant help. Dr. Kethra led the first medical team onto Ascendari soil. She walked through the capital city, past the desperate crowds and the silent bodies, straight into the main hospital. The Ascendari doctors looked at her with shock. 5 years ago, their government had voted to exterminate her entire species. Now she had come to save them. "Where are the worst cases?" Kethra asked. An Ascendari doctor pointed toward a sealed wing of the hospital. "We put them there to die. There is nothing we can do." Kethra nodded and walked toward the sealed door. Behind her, human and Velkari doctors followed, carrying equipment and supplies. The treatment they brought had been developed on Earth. It was a combination of Velkari cellular regeneration and human medical innovation. Neither technique would have worked alone. Together, they could stop the scourge. For 3 days, Kethra did not sleep. She moved from patient to patient, teaching Ascendari doctors the new treatment and administering it herself when needed. Human nurses worked beside Velkari technicians. They saved lives side by side. On the third night, a young Ascendari journalist found Kethra resting in a hallway. She was exhausted, her gray skin pale, her dark eyes heavy. "Doctor," the journalist said, "why did you come here? The Ascendari tried to kill your people. We voted for your extinction. Why would you help us?" Kethra looked up. She thought about the question for a long moment. "When my people arrived on Earth," she finally said, "we expected hatred. We expected fear. Instead, we found something we had never seen before. We found creatures who helped strangers simply because it was right, who gave without expecting to receive, who saw our suffering and could not look away." She stood up slowly and looked the journalist in the eyes. "The humans taught us that mercy is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. It costs everything and gains nothing. And it is the only thing that truly matters." The journalist lowered his camera. Tears rolled down his silver face. "I do not understand," he whispered. "Neither did we," Kethra replied. "But we learned." Across the galaxy, the same scenes repeated. Human and Velkari medical teams traveled to every world touched by the scourge. They asked for nothing in return. They treated enemies and strangers with equal care. The Rothani, who had called for the Velkari extinction, watched Velkari doctors save their children. The collective of minds who had voted yes without hesitation felt human nurses hold their hands as they healed. On the Ascendari homeworld, High Consul Velmoran sat beside his daughter's medical chamber. The treatment was working. Color was returning to her silver skin. She would live. A human doctor named Maria sat beside him. She had worked for 40 hours without rest to save Shelani. "Why?" Velmoran asked, his voice breaking. "We have done nothing to deserve this kindness." Maria looked at him with tired but gentle eyes. "That is not how kindness works," she said. "Kindness is not a reward for good behavior. It is a gift, freely given. The humans learned this a long time ago. It took us many wars and much suffering, but we learned." Velmoran bowed his silver head. For the first time in his long life, he felt shame. True shame, deep and heavy. He had voted to destroy an entire species, and now that species was saving his daughter. "I was wrong," he whispered. "We were all wrong." Maria put her hand on his shoulder. "Then learn from it," she said. "That is all anyone can do." The scourge was defeated within 6 months. The death toll was terrible, nearly 100 million lives across 12 species, but it would have been billions without the help from Earth. When the crisis ended, the galaxy looked at humanity with new eyes. They had expected negotiation. They had expected demands. They had received only compassion. For the first time in their history, the great powers of the galaxy began to question everything they believed. 50 years had passed since the vote. The galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The old Galactic Council was gone. It had collapsed under the weight of its own shame after the Scourge. Species that once voted for genocide now struggled to explain their choices to their children. How could they justify condemning innocents to death? How could they claim to be civilized when they had acted like monsters? A new council had risen in its place. They called it the Alliance of Worlds. Its founding principle was simple: no species would ever face extinction alone again. And at the center of this new order stood humanity, not through conquest or power, but through moral authority earned by decades of compassion. The Velkari had flourished. Their population had grown from 10,000 to 2 million. 3 colony worlds now carried their name, gifts from species seeking to make amends. Young Velkari grew up knowing both the sorrow of their history and the hope of their future. Today was the anniversary of the vote. Every year, beings from across the galaxy gathered on Station Primarch to remember. This year was special. This year they would unveil a monument. Elder Kethra stood at the podium. She was very old now. Nearly 600 years had passed since her birth. Her gray skin was thin as paper, and her dark eyes had grown clouded with age. But her voice remained strong. Behind her, covered by a white cloth, stood the monument. It was carved from 2 types of stone: dark rock from the Velkari homeworld and blue-gray granite from Earth. The sculptors had spent 10 years creating it. "I was there the day of the vote," Kethra began. Her voice echoed through the great hall where the vote had taken place so long ago. "I sat in this very chamber and watched 46 species decide that my people should die. I felt the weight of that judgment. I believed it was the end." She paused. Thousands of beings watched her in silence. Then one voice spoke against the darkness. One small species, new to the galaxy, with no power and no allies. They stood alone and said no. They risked everything for strangers they had never met. Kethra turned and pulled the white cloth from the monument. The sculpture showed 2 hands clasped together. One hand was human, strong and smooth. The other was Velkari, slender and gray. They held each other not in desperation, but in friendship, in trust, in hope. "This monument honors what humanity taught the galaxy," Kethra continued. "They taught us that civilization is not measured by technology or power. It is measured by how we treat those who cannot help themselves. They taught us that mercy is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. They taught us that the smallest act of kindness can change the universe." In the crowd, Ambassador Elena Vasquez watched through tear-filled eyes. She was old now, 93 years old and leaning on a cane. Her hair had turned white, and her hands shook with age. But she had lived long enough to see this day. Beside her stood Secretary General Okonkwo, also ancient but still fierce. They had worked together for decades, building bridges between Earth and the stars. They had faced hatred and fear and doubt. They had never stopped believing that kindness would win. The ceremony continued. Species after species came forward to speak. The Rothani ambassador apologized for his people's vote and pledged eternal friendship with the Velkari. The Ascendari representative, the daughter of the old High Consul, spoke of how her father had changed after the Scourge, how he spent his final years working to undo the harm he had caused. When the speeches ended, the crowd began to scatter. But Elena remained standing before the monument. She traced the carved hands with her tired eyes. A small tug at her sleeve made her look down. A Velkari child stood beside her. The little one was perhaps 5 years old, with bright, curious eyes and smooth gray skin. She wore a blue scarf, a color that had become traditional for Velkari children, in memory of the old woman who had welcomed them to Earth. "Excuse me," the child said in careful English. "Are you the human from the stories?" Elena smiled and lowered herself painfully to one knee. "What stories, little one?" "The stories my grandmother tells. About the vote. About the human who said no when everyone else said yes." The child tilted her head. "My grandmother says you saved our people." Elena shook her head gently. "I only spoke. Many others did the real work. Doctors who healed, families who opened their homes, children who shared their toys with strangers." She reached out and touched the child's cheek. "Your people saved themselves. We just gave you a place to stand." The child thought about this. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. But why? Why did you vote no when everyone else voted yes? Elena looked at the monument, then back at the child. She thought about all the years that had passed, all the struggles and triumphs, all the lives lost and saved. She thought about her grandmother, who had survived by the kindness of strangers. She thought about old Marie, who had wrapped a scarf around a frightened alien child on a cold morning. Because someone had to be the first to say it was wrong, Elena finally answered. Someone had to stand up and refuse. It does not matter if you are small or weak or alone. It does not matter if you cannot win. What matters is that you try. What matters is that you speak. She took the child's small gray hand in her wrinkled human one. We decided that someone would be us, and that made all the difference. The child nodded slowly, her young mind storing away words she would remember for the rest of her long life. Around them, the galaxy continued to turn. Ships traveled between stars. Beings of countless species worked together, learned together, grew together. The old fears were not gone. They never fully disappeared. But they were smaller now, pushed back by something stronger. On Earth, in the town of New Haven, Valkyrie and human children played together in the summer sun. They spoke a language that mixed both tongues. They told each other stories of heroes who chose mercy over fear. And in the great hall of Station Primarch, the monument stood eternal. Two hands clasped together, two species joined by choice rather than blood. A reminder to all who pass that the measure of a people is not found in their weapons or their wealth. It is found in how they answer one simple question. When the universe asks you to choose between cruelty and kindness, what will you say? Humanity had given its answer 50 years ago. The galaxy was still learning to say the same.